Hey everybody, Brett Etheridge here, founder of Dominate the GMAT and Dominate the GRE, leading providers of online test prep for the GMAT and GRE respectively. And in this video, I'd like to break down really two questions that I know a lot of you have. And the reason I know a lot of you have it is because I get emails all the time or comments on my Facebook page or my YouTube channel asking, what's the difference between the GMAT and the GRE? And the second question, really probably the more important question for you is, which one should I take? Which one is right for me? And so I'm going to break it all down. I'm going to make it very concrete. And I'm also going to do my best to at least point you in the right direction to make clear what the decision point is. Without knowing your personal exact situation, I can't really make that blanket advice for you. If you have questions, you can certainly reach out to me. Email me, Brett at either dominathegmat.com or Brett at dominathegre.com, and I can deal with your personal situation. But I think this video will really answer all of your questions, and so let's go ahead and dive in. Now, the very first thing to look at, right, so we're going to look at several different categories, criterion for kind of how to evaluate the GMAT versus the GRE. We're going to look at the usefulness, which test is good for what, the cost, the length, and then specifically we're going to spend a little bit of time on what's tested so you understand, again, the differences between these two. And then I'm going to weigh in with, again, a few miscellaneous considerations for you to think about. In terms of the usefulness, it's pretty straightforward. The GMAT is used specifically and exclusively for admission to business school, right? So if you're applying to business school, almost certainly they will accept and maybe even require the GMAT for entrance as part of your application. Now the GRE is a little bit more versatile because it's useful for both business school and, right, so this big and grad school more generally. I'm going to put a little asterisk here next to business school because you may be thinking, okay, well, that's pretty easy, right? And for a lot of you, you don't even have to continue watching this video. You know that you're going to graduate school, maybe a master's degree in really anything, master's of education, social work. Maybe you're going for your PhD program. You're going to need to use the GRE and not the GMAT. Now, for those of you who may be applying to business school and you're trying to decide, that's what the rest of this video is for, but I put a little asterisk here because the reality is the GMAT for years and years and years and years was the only test accepted by business schools. And just recently, business schools have started to accept the GRE. But the reality is that not all business schools accept the GRE yet. Or if they do, it's really kind of plays second fiddle, like they really want you to apply with the GMAT. And so my advice right off the bat is, if that's you and you're applying to an MBA, a traditional MBA program, and the school says, that they'll accept both, trust that they will accept the GRE, but a lot of times you want to reach out because some schools will flat out tell you, no, we really only want the GMAT. So that's really kind of the first decision point, and I hope that's helpful. Now, the second point is kind of cost. And this really should be a non-issue, and it is when you see the price. It costs $250 to take the GMAT, only $195 to take the GRE, so really a non-issue. And certainly when you're thinking about spending tens of thousands of dollars a year for your graduate program, an extra $50, $55 shouldn't make or break your decision point, but nevertheless, it is a consideration. And by the way, that's at the time of the recording of this video, so there's a chance that those prices are a little bit different when you're actually looking to enroll. Length of the test, again, really a non-issue. They're essentially the same. These are standardized tests with multiple sections. You're going to be expected to sit down and take the GMAT for 3 hours and 30 minutes, right? So fasten your seatbelt, get ready to go. It's kind of annoying, I get it. It's a long test. But the GRE is just as long. Technically, it's only 3 hours and 10 minutes of material that's actually going to be scored. So you might be thinking, hey, I'd rather get out of there 20 minutes early. But the kind of the catch is the GRE actually has an experimental section that you have to take, and you don't know it's the experimental section, and you don't know which of the sections is experimental. So actually there's an extra 30 or 35-minute section depending on whether the experimental section is quant or verbal. So really actually you're going to be sitting for more like 3 hours and 40 to 3 hours and 45 minutes for the GRE. So actually the GRE is going to be a little bit longer, but again by 10 to 15 minutes, so a non-issue there. Kind of the meat and potatoes comes down though to the difference in terms of what's tested content-wise. Now both tests test your quantitative acuity, your verbal acuity, and really your critical reasoning, your ability to think critically. Why? Because they're testing your ability to perform well in an advanced level graduate program, whether that's a business degree, a traditional MBA, or any sort of other graduate degree. And you need to be able to do certain things. You need to be able to process numbers. You need to be able to read and understand what it is you're reading and so forth. And so both tests test that, but they do it in slightly different ways. So let's look at the differences of what they test, and I want to highlight those differences because that kind of is your decision point, right? Which test might I be a little bit stronger in, depending on those differences. So I'm going to start with where they're the same. They're the same in that you both tests start by writing an essay. So the very first thing you do in both tests is you write an essay. Technically, the first essay isn't analyzing an argument, but that's the essay that they have in common. You're going to analyze an argument in both tests. The second thing you do is a little bit different, so I'm going to hold off on that. So you're going to write an essay for both tests. Now let's look at the quantitative section, right? The quantitative section tests the same type of stuff. Basic algebra, basic arithmetic, basic geometry, right? No proofs. It's not really advanced level math. They just test it in slightly different ways. But the way they test it the same is in the general problem solving section. So both tests, about half of the math questions are traditional run-of-the-mill math questions, right? Those word problems that you answer the question, you choose from a multiple choice section. Yeah, the GRE has a little bit different question format. Sometimes you have to actually provide your own answer, and some students don't like that. The GMAT is exclusively multiple choice. But the point is you have problem solving, traditional run-of-the-mill problem solving math questions on both tests. In terms of the verbal section, as you would expect, both tests test your ability to understand what it is you are reading. So both have a reading comprehension section. Again, almost identical. The passages are slightly shorter in the GRE than the GMAT, but again, you're reading content that you may not know anything about, and you're answering questions accordingly. So that's where the tests are the same. Now let's look at how they're a little bit different, and I'm going to kind of highlight it in red. After you write your first essay, the GMAT has a separate section called Integrated Reasoning. And it's where they test your ability to process graphical information, tables, charts, graphs, data coming from multiple sources, and synthesizing it and answering questions, because that is a very business school specific skill, right? That's what we do in business school, is we look at data and look at, financial tables and things like that, and we answer questions about it. And you're going to have to do that on the GMAT. On the GRE, at least as of the time of this recording, you don't do that. You instead write a second essay. And now that the GRE is being used in business schools as well, they may feel pressured to add a section, kind of like integrated reasoning section. But again, as of now, you don't have to do that. So you're going to write 2 essays for the GRE, 1 essay for the GMAT, and an integrated reasoning section. Now, the real difference in terms of the quantitative section comes in the unique question type that is specific to each test. Right? So on the quantitative section, you're going to have problem solving on both tests, but on the GMAT, there's a very specific, very unique question type called data sufficiency. Oops, sorry, I'm going to keep that in green. So data sufficiency is your question type, math question type, DS, that's unique to the GMAT, whereas on the GRE, the unique question type is called Quantitative Comparisons. QCs. Like I said, they're unique question types that test your ability to think about math concepts in a slightly convoluted way, like a way you've never thought about it before. My purpose in this video isn't to teach it to you, but I do want you to see an example of each so that you can kind of conceptually get your mind around what you're expected to do, because it may jump off the screen at you immediately that, hey, I think I'd do better at this type of question, or I think I would do better at that type of question, so let's take a closer look. So this first question you see is a sample data sufficiency question that you might encounter on the GMAT. Now let me say this, it's admittedly easy. Like, this isn't a real former GMAT data sufficiency question. It's a question I use to teach the underlying concepts on how to answer these questions and what the answer choices mean. It's actually a question I've pulled straight from one of my courses. But the idea is you actually have a question, like what is the value of x, the variable x, and then you have two statements. And it's a weird way to think about math. You're not actually trying to answer the question, what is x? You're not actually trying to figure out what x equals. Now I know glancing down you can quickly figure out what it equals, like x equals 5, right? Because statement number 1 says that x plus 3 equals 8, so x obviously equals 5. But that's not actually what we're trying to do here. There's no place to actually answer that question. Instead, if you look at the answer choices, I'm going to go quickly through this. Again, I'm not trying to teach you these question types, but you are simply trying to determine whether or not the statements have given sufficient information to answer the question. And that poses some challenges in terms of thinking through these question types, but it also presents opportunities because you have to do less work. You don't actually have to solve the problems, you just have to decide whether or not you could solve the problem. And once you learn to do these, you know, my students all the time, they come into the GMAT hating data sufficiency, right? They're just like, I can't get my mind around it. But after a few lessons, like going through my course, after a few sessions, these become questions that they love. And they actually wish there were more of them because there are so many tricks and strategies and ways of attacking these. But very simply here, you see the correct answer is answer choice A. And the reason is because only statement number 1 gives you enough information to answer the question, to figure out what x is. In other words, only statement 1 by itself is sufficient to answer the question because obviously you have a single equation with a single variable. You could solve for x. And as I said, x would equal 5. But again, I don't care that x equals 5. I just care that I can answer the question. Now you might be thinking, wait a second, Brett, doesn't statement 2 also give me enough information? Like, can I also solve for x? Here's a little trick, a little hint for you, right? Kind of your first little math primer, as you're thinking about studying for the GMAT, remember that when you take the square root, x could either be plus or minus 5, right? Because negative 5 squared also equals 25. And you're probably thinking, oh yeah, you're slapping yourself in the head. I forgot about that. But because statement 2 gives you 2 potential values of x, and you have no way of deciding between them, obviously statement 2 by itself wouldn't provide enough to answer the question. So anyway, that is data sufficiency. Now take a look at this quantitative comparison question. This is the unique question type as tested on the GRE. It's also unique, it's also different, and in these question types, you're evaluating quantitative content, right, the math that you need to know, but you're evaluating it based on trying to determine relative size of quantities. Is the information, is the quantity in column A bigger, or is the quantity in column B bigger, or are they the same? And then of course you see your answer choices. Now right away, what do you notice? There are only 4 possible answer choices in quantitative comparisons, whereas you have 5 on the GMAT for data sufficiency. So at worst, your guessing odds are actually better. And I'm not saying that's the only reason to take the GRE instead of the GMAT, but I am saying just statistically, you have a better chance of guessing right answers, on quantitative comparisons. So anyway, you obviously are given some information and then you're trying to evaluate the columns, and you can see certainly the correct answer is D. We would need more information. And you can just run some hypotheticals, right? All we are told is that x is between 1 and 3. So obviously if x is 2, right smack dab in the middle, those columns are equal, right? Because 2 squared is 4, 2 times 2 is 4, so those quantities are equal. But they're not always going to be equal, right? Because what if x instead happened to be a lot closer to 3, like 2.999999999, right? Obviously in that case, column A would be closer to 9, close to 3 squared, whereas column B would only be close to 6, like a little bit less than 6. So in that case, column A would be bigger. Conversely, x could be 1.000000001, just something a little bit bigger than 1, and that would reverse it. So we're not sure. And as a result, the correct answer is answer choice D. Now again, my purpose wasn't to teach you how to actually solve those question types. That's what my course is for. Obviously teach you step-by-step methodology, how to eliminate wrong answers, strategies for attacking different question types, but just kind of get your mind around, do you want to try to figure out whether or not you've been given enough information, or do you want to simply kind of compare the quantities? And the reality is most people feel, most of my students who have taken both tests believe, they feel like, the GMAT's a little bit more quantitatively rigorous. As you might expect, for going to business school. And so if math is your weaker area, and you're given the choice, right? Objectively, you're allowed to apply with the GRE and they're going to treat it just the same. Most students will do a little bit better on the quant section on the GRE, given kind of the same ability level. Again, quantitative comparisons may be a little bit easier than data sufficiency. Personal choice, but I'm just telling you kind of that's what most people feel. Now on the verbal section, where are the differences? You're going to have an explicit critical reasoning section on the GMAT where you're given arguments and you're supposed to dissect those arguments and answer questions, finding assumptions, finding conclusions, what can you infer, what are the premises, those types of things. There's no such section on the GRE, right? Now, it's not to say you don't have to think critically on the GRE. It's just that those types of questions tend to be embedded in the reading comprehension. You're more likely to get some questions that might otherwise be asked in this section within the reading comprehension section of the GRE. It's just that there's no explicit question type like that. And finally, both tests have a SC question type, standing for sentence, dun dun dun, wait for it. Here's where it's different. On the GMAT, it's called sentence correction. On the GRE, it's called sentence completions. So you're doing two very different things. On the GMAT, you're correcting sentences. Specifically, you're looking for grammar mistakes. You're trying to make a sentence read more effectively or more grammatically correct. Whereas on the GRE, you're trying to fill in the blanks with vocabulary words that logically complete the sentence or make them equivalent depending on the question type you're looking at. And so to summarize that, the GMAT verbal section is more grammar intensive, whereas the GRE is more vocabulary intensive. Does it make sense? And so which are you going to be better at? Do you feel like you have a better English vocabulary, or do you think you're better at English grammar? And maybe that may come down to whether or not you're a native English speaker or not. One of my GRE students is actually from South America. She lives in Colombia, Bogota, Colombia. And she just actually sent me an email saying, Brett, you know, I'm a little discouraged because I'm really struggling with the sentence completion. She said, I've been studying English since age 5. I love reading English for pleasure. And yet when I take the GRE and I look at the answer choices, I'll go through an entire practice test and there won't be a single question for which I know what every single answer choice, what the word means. You know, like you're trying to maybe complete the sentence and you're given 5 words that would complete the sentence. She says, I look at those 5 words and there's always at least one that I just don't know the textbook definition of it. Now the good news is I teach lots of strategies on how to still get a right answer. My point though is, you know, would that be different if she had been a native English speaker? Possibly. Right? And so just something to think about. Now, can you learn? Can you study a lot of vocabulary to prepare for the GRE? Absolutely. You know, and I provide a list of the 400 most commonly tested words, but obviously more than just 400 words are tested, so you do need to have a strong vocabulary. Tip for you right now, start reading more. Like one of the best things you could do between now and test day for whichever test you're going to be taking is read more, read more, read more, right? In general, though, I hope you kind of see the differences. I hope you see where I've highlighted some things that maybe play to your strengths a little bit more. Maybe you got a really strong vocabulary. Maybe you're better at reading tables and charts. 3 other kind of things to think about, though. From a practical standpoint, are there testing locations near you? Again, if you're able to choose, I know I have a lot of students sometimes from Africa, for parts of Asia, where maybe there's only one testing center in the city nearest to where they live. Maybe there are more options for the GRE than the GMAT, for example, or vice versa. So you might want to do a little bit of research before you commit and make sure you're even going to be able to access a testing center pretty easily that'll have time options for you that fit within your schedule. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is, and this is really just kind of a subtle idea, right? A very subtle thing is business schools really tout their average GMAT score, especially the top schools, right? They publish it on their website. You know, a Harvard Business School has an average GMAT of 710 or 720 or whatever it happens to be currently, right? And they don't really want to mess that up. So I just want you to think about the logic of this. This is something I've talked with a lot of admissions consultants about. We have no hard and fast, tangible data to support this, but I want you to think about the logic. If you're a top business school, and you have a student applying with a less than ideal score, right? And it's a less than ideal GMAT score that you know you have to now factor into your average and might pull down your average and affect your ability to compete against Stanford and Booth and Wharton and some of the other business schools. Are you more likely to take that student or somebody with maybe a slightly below average GRE, but you don't have to publish that data? You know what I'm saying? So really, if you bring a lot of other things to the table, you're a great candidate, great application, great essays, lots of extracurriculars, you're a strong candidate in everything except for your standardized test, you may have a slightly better chance applying with the GRE just because of that logic, right? Makes sense to me. Like I said, I have no anecdotal evidence, but just kind of think about that. And then the final thing, kind of the third point is, for whatever reason, women, the AGAC, I'm a member of AGAC, the Association of Admissions Consultants, International Admissions Consultants, and they just did a big survey where they pulled hundreds, thousands actually, of business school applicants. And women seem to feel that they will have better success on the GRE. So a lot of times women who have taken the GMAT and maybe not scored as well migrate over to the GRE, and whether it's just a confidence issue, whether, belief, as the great Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. So maybe it's just because, hey, I believe I'm going to do better on the GRE than the GMAT, and gosh darn you do. For whatever reason, women just kind of statistically feel like they have a better chance and actually do a little bit better on the GRE relative to kind of average scores than on the GMAT. So maybe if you're watching this and you fall into the female category, that's something to consider. So again, I know I can't give you a specific recommendation just for you, but I hope I've highlighted some of the key differences between the GMAT and the GRE. I hope you understand what they're used for. And if you have any questions, again, reach out to me. And specifically, certainly if you're looking to actually get into some of the top business schools or PhD programs and you want a little bit of help, I'm here to help, right? So check out my courses at dominatethegmat.com or dominathegre.com, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the other side.